Hi, it's Kim Boon. In yesterday's video, I talked about the role of the opposition and PAP receiving varying degrees of mandate from Singaporeans. As usual, the comment section was very busy, and there's something that came out that I thought is worth discussing in today's video. One of our viewers, Fight Videos, highlighted an issue about using the conventional nomenclature for the non-ruling parties. It seemed to have struck a chord with folks, with some nonchalant about it, deeming it just a difference in terminology. Others are more introspective about the usage of opposition, as it may have certain connotations. So I thought that in this video, let's talk through both sides of this argument. By the way, for the purpose of this video, I will use the term opposition as we discuss its merits. It's not an indication that I have pre-taken a conclusion, but a matter of convenience. So a couple of days ago, the good folks over at Inconvenient Questions discussed this very topic. I thought that we look at some of their views and talk about some of my own. I'll have their full video linked in the description, and they have some great content there, so check it out when you got some time. Alright, let's kickstart this with IQ Chief Editor, Mr. Wiswa.
A few days ago, a couple of friends asked me, why is it that we call the non-ruling political parties opposition parties? They felt that it's more appropriate and fair to refer to them as alternative parties. In fact, this point has been raised by several people over the years. Now, here's my take based on my understanding of the Westminster System, parliamentary system, that Singapore has adopted.
Let's talk a bit about the Westminster System. This is basically the type of government that we have in Singapore. One way to think about it is that it contrasts most with the US system, where a lot of the power is concentrated with the president and is checked by the Senate and Congress along with the Supreme Court. The US system is a bit more complicated than that, but we will not get into that in this video. What we need to know and understand is that the Westminster heritage is why we have a largely ceremonial president with powers over reserve, a head of government in our Prime Minister, a civil service that is non-partisan, and most importantly, for the purpose of our discussion today, why we use the term opposition and leader of the opposition. To use an analogy, it's a bit like how meat is named. Cow is beef, pig is pork. You get the idea.
Now, when Parliament is in session, the non-ruling party MPs would form the opposition. In other words, they're in opposition to the ruling party. And when a particular party wins a significant number of seats, the leader of that party assumes the official title of leader of the opposition.
Okay, this is the heart of our discussion today. Opposition, as the name suggests, opposes. The position that was put forth by some is that this nomenclature is not neutral, and it is unfair that they are assumed to be opposing all the time, that the fairer term to use is alternative parties.
However, there are aspects of the budget that are of concern to us. We disagree with the decision to raise the goods and services tax, especially at this time.
When union leaders are also PAP members, a potential conflict of interest arises. Can they fully advocate for workers' interests when those interests may conflict with the government policies or the PAP's political agenda?
For the sake of Singapore and the 1.7 million policyholders of income, it is important that we stop this deal in its current form.
That the opposition opposes the ruling party, that is a way of life. In fact, I think that Singaporeans expect it. This is part of the process of checks and balances to call out and oppose when things do not look right. I don't think anyone can deny that. And obviously, that is not all they do. The opposition have regularly proposed new ideas that are put up for consideration in Parliament.
It is impossible to claim that we have not prospered. It is time to call in that promise made close to 6 decades ago and reinstate Thaipusam as a national holiday.
MINDEF should transform NS into a value-accretive experience for our national servicemen by ensuring appropriate remuneration, relevant training, and stronger education and career integration.
Now let's discuss this. Let's use an example. NCMP and member of the Progress Singapore Party, Ms. Hazel Phua, proposed that the GRC system be abolished.
And the GRC was intended to enhance the chances of PAP winning at the expense of the opposition. Such an approach, however, encourages the kiasu or fear to lose syndrome breeds a generation of politicians sheltered from tough electoral battles and sets unsustainable expectations. If we do not have GRCs, only SMCs, then these problems would not exist.
Do you think she is proposing or opposing in this example? At face value, it appears that this is a new thoughtful proposal for Parliament to consider. No, but I ask you to consider this also. The GRC system has almost 40 years of precedence. It was effected in 1988 at a time where there's hardly any opposition MPs. You could say that this was a PAP product. Now, fast forward to 2023, Ms. Phua talks about abolishing it. Is this not opposing an idea that was proposed by the PAP back in 1980s, sustained through the decades? And I'm not debating the merits of the GRC system. Let's focus on the crux of the discussion. What the opposition raises can essentially be a referendum on ideas that the ruling party had agreed to and maintained. In essence, the opposition opposes the idea and wants a change. And by the way, who's to say that opposing is a bad thing? If something is bad, it should be opposed. I'm betting that many of you were nodding your heads when you heard about abolishing the GRC system. And it's this reason that I put to the people who dislike the opposition terminology. I believe that your goal is to correctly position the opposition in the right light. And for every one of you who thinks that the term opposition is not neutral, there's another that thinks that it is positive. And that's why I'm not convinced how opposing is bad in the first place. I believe it's part of the job description, in fact, and I value the opposition for that. And here's another food for thought. When you think of Google, what kind of company do you think it is? I'm guessing most of you think it's a search engine or email company, maybe an advertising company. So Google is involved in the news, storage, AI, video platforms, and a ton of other verticals, but you're calling it a company that does a single thing. Why? Because it is the convention, and probably because the activity is the one that resonates most with you. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. Just like there's nothing wrong with using the term opposition, even if they only opposed part of the time. So that said, one of the challenges with opposing is the optics.
In Westminster, in London, to facilitate this role, the leading opposition party would usually form what's called a shadow cabinet, which will table alternative policy proposals to counter government policy positions.
Now, Singapore is interesting because the leader of the opposition does not form a shadow cabinet alongside the actual cabinet. Now, think of Ms. Hazel Phua's example again. Say she is the shadow minister in the Prime Minister's office, I guess a counterpart for Minister Indrani. If she proposed the exact same thing, I think psychologically it will be hard to say that Ms. Phua is opposing. After all, it is literally in her job description to think of alternative ideas alongside the cabinet of the day. In politics, optics matters, so she would come across as less opposing and more proposing. There are merits to using the alternative nomenclature, and it's timely because we are exactly in that period now where Parliament is dissolved.
See, in my view, during this phase, when there's no ruling party as such, it is more appropriate to refer to the other parties as alternative parties and not opposition parties. This is simply because there is no ruling party as such. In other words, there is no incumbency. This is not just semantics. It sets the right tone and sends a clear signal that parties respect and abide by the rules of fair play.
Now, I can agree that there's nothing to oppose when there's no actual parliament, although frankly, I'm just thinking as an average Singaporean. It may sound a lot like semantics, because most of us will not care enough about the aspects of fair play and rules. I personally may not agree, but who cares what I think, right? There is, however, another use case that supports the use of alternative parties. Think of young voters that come of age every election. I don't know about you, but I was not very mature when I was 21 years old. I was certainly not politically aware. If I were to hear that someone is opposing the government, my natural instinct will be to raise my guards. And at the polls, it is not inconceivable that I put a check mark on the ruling party simply because they look like the good guys, the guys being opposed. Of course, most of you are now older, you are savvy and obviously not going to be swayed by some naming convention and stick to the key issues when making your votes. But think of from the shoes of someone much younger. Maybe using alternative parties isn't so bad after all. Oh, and there's one last thing. I was doing some research on this topic and came across this little nugget from the Parliament of Singapore website. It seems that in one of their brochures, they used the term minority parties when referring to the non-ruling parties. And goodness, when will this madness end? At the end of the day, I'm really struggling to find the right word to use. And the irony of it all is that people actually know what you're saying when you use opposition, alternative, or even minority party. The only thing that is different is how the words make you feel. And everyone feels differently, so who's to say which is better? I don't know, guys. I'm still of two minds about this whole thing. What do you think about this? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And until next time, this is our Red Dot Perspective.